Taifa Smith Butler. She is the president of Demos. Thank you so much for being here. Now, first of all, let me tell everybody that Demos is a progressive think tank policy and action organization that is doing amazing work trying to combat all of this wealth inequality. And Taifa, welcome to the show. I want you to really break down for us how on earth the wealthiest Americans made so much money last year when so many of us were suffering and the entire economy was falling apart. What in the world is going down?
Well, first of all, Aisha, thank you for having me. It is an honor and a privilege to hang out with you for this few minutes to talk about this report that we co-authored with People's Action. You know, all while America, well, I won't say all of America, but where Black and Brown communities across this country were suffering not only a physical health crisis, but a financial crisis of economic proportions in their families last year, we saw the stock market do something completely different, right? We saw the government do a few things to help respond to the needs of folks, you know, where we got the stimulus checks, where they expanded UI and unemployment insurance to really help families fare through this time. But what we also saw was as we are trying to recover, corporations have been spending hundreds of millions of dollars to talking out of both sides of their mouths, if you ask me, whereas some of our corporate friends would say, yes, we're all about worker power and creating the right kinds of conditions, looking at healthcare access, looking at housing, but at the same time, they're spending dollars to thwart these components in the Build Back Better plan. And so our report with People's Actions really lift up some of these corporate spending through the lobbyist reports and show how some of our corporate partners are not being good actors right now.
So many of these corporations are not good actors. And, you know, the thing that frustrates me so much about this is that all the corporations, you know that it is lucrative for them in some ways, especially the ones that sell consumer goods, to say Black Lives Matter, to put up a rainbow, right, whenever it's Pride Month, to even go as far sometimes as to support trans rights, right, or to have like androgynous people in their ads and talk all this trash about diversity, equity, and inclusion, and then they put out that brown person that they hired to be like a random VP in, you know, the widgets and things of HR or something, right? So they're doing all of this because it looks good on paper. You know, we care about diversity, equity, blah, blah, blah. And at the same time, working against so many of us. And I think that this is so interesting because they don't have to be held accountable to the public on how they deal with poverty and wealth, right? You can deal with people because, you know, in their color or their orientation. But this idea of like this wealth gap and talking out of both sides of your mouth, like how do they get away with this without consumers like being completely outraged?
Exactly. And I think, you know, case in point was with Amazon last year when, you know, there was these statements and overtures of, yes, we know that racial injustice exists and we as a corporation are all about, you know, trying to address these issues. But when you have workers in Alabama trying to organize to collectively bargain for better working conditions and better pay, that is not supported by the corporation. And what I think is alarming for me is when you have a pandemic like this that we're enduring right now, and you have pharmaceutical companies that are trying to be on the front end of this, creating vaccinations and medications and things to help us manage this physical challenge with our health and our public health, but at the same time spending dollars and using those dollars to misinform the public about Medicare for all and some of the other health programs that are really important right now for our public to get behind. So I think those are the things that are disingenuous. And when we talk about decentralizing corporate power and recognizing the fact that corporations have way too much sway in our political space, in our political sector, and all we're asking for is that Black and Brown communities can have a voice, is that they also want a seat at the table to inform and influence the economic conditions and forces that influence and shape their lives every single day. And it's out for
Mm.
corporations who continue to benefit off the backs of their workers by low wages and low pay and no health care benefits
Mm-hmm.
and all the other things that they don't provide, but yet their CEOs and their corporations and their stakeholders are taking home bank year after year. And what we're saying is we are living in a moment in this country where we must do better and we must do different. And whether or not
How
our
do we?
political yes, how do we? Well, I would say we are in an
Mm-hmm.
incredible governing moment. Regardless of what you think
Mm.
about politics, this opportunity to expand critical programs and services and supports to working America, we are at a moment in time that we should not miss. And so, this Build Back Better plan, we're playing games talking about all the dollars that it will cost. Meanwhile, when we want to pass tax cuts and tax expenditures for the very wealthy and the corporations, nobody talks about the cost. Nobody talks about what we lose when we give corporations more dollars or when we give them subsidies and tax breaks, right? And so I think that we have to garner as much public support and public will to get behind Build Back Better and all the components of housing, child care,
Mm-hmm.
child tax credits, EITC expansion,
Mm-hmm.
the healthcare expansion pieces of this, because this will
Yep.
make everyday Americans' lives better. Period.
And I don't want to lose sight of the fact that a lot of these corporations that you're talking about, we're going to come back after the break and name some names, but a lot of these corporations are supporting Joe Manchin and Kirsten Sinema, and frankly, they are more beholden to them than they are to us, which is why Build Back Better is also being held up. We're going to talk about all that when we come back. Taifa is going to stay with us. Stick around through the break and keep the conversation going with us. Welcome back to Amplified. Now, before the break, we were taking a deep dive into the root causes of wealth inequality and talking about the corporate actors that are essentially derailing our benefits while they take a whole lot of government benefits to get rich. DEMO's President Taifa Smith Butler is back with us to discuss this some more. And Taifa, you know, you were talking about the report that you did, looking at how so many billionaires really just got, you know, their bank accounts exploded through COVID, and how corporations are simultaneously lobbying against, you know, the rest of us who are just trying to make it. I'm also thinking about some of these same actors being engaged in, or not, the fight around voting rights and funding and bankrolling our opponents in a whole lot of arenas while they're taking our dollars from us as we're purchasing their goods. And I know that in addition to advocating for economic justice, Demos also works to combat voter suppression. So I would love for you to talk a bit about how those two issues are related and the work that you're doing there.
Absolutely. You know, one of the things that I've really appreciated about Demos being a fan for years before I joined the team in July is how we have talked about this intersection of economic power and political power. And that we cannot have political power without economic power. And that means, you know, as much as we talk about democracy writ large, that it is not just about access to the ballot and making sure that our voices are heard, that where we can control and inform who is making decisions for us in our communities, in our states, and at the federal level, who's representing us, who is carrying our burdens and our issues to these seats of decision making. But it's also being able to shape our economic forces, right? Like I mentioned earlier, how can we shape the decisions that are being made about our work conditions, the work quality, that the job quality that we want? How can we have a say in collectively bargaining, for example, fair scheduling, right? And the healthcare benefits that we want and upward mobility that we like to have on our jobs. These are the things that we believe go hand in hand if we truly want an inclusive democracy and economy in this country. And so we must think about this moment, like I mentioned earlier, where we have the opportunity to advance Build Back Better and these kinds of components within that broader agenda that will help address some of the economic challenges. But make no mistake, Congress, the president cannot sleep in this moment to ensure that we protect our right to vote. And what concerns me most right now is where you have a proliferation of these voter suppression bills. 18 states have passed laws, Georgia being one of them, which is where I'm sitting right now. And then you have voter purge efforts that are happening across the country that continue to disproportionately affect Black and Brown communities. By coincidence? But also now that you have this sort of broader issue of redistricting based on a census that was underfunded and likely has undercounted Black and Brown communities, and we're redrawing lines right now that will inform these next election cycles for the next 10 years. So we must at
Well, and the
every
people who are
level
redrawing those
possible.
lines are conservatives.
Right. So we
Yeah,
must
you got
protect
Republicans who are
the right to
drawing those
vote.
lines. Yeah.
That's
Yeah,
right. That's
so
right.
here's the thing, though. I mean,
go ahead.
I am talking all the time about voting rights, right? We want to beat Joe Manchin and Kirsten Sinema over the head with voting rights, and get rid of the doggone filibuster, for crying out loud, because it's nothing but a Jim Crow relic that, now at this point, frankly, a bunch of white people are upholding a racist, kind of protocol in order to do what? To do nothing, right? It'd be one thing if they were trying to uphold this because they really were trying to move something for the American people, but they're actually trying to maintain the filibuster as a way to do absolutely nothing for the American people. I can rant about this all day long.
Do nothing but hold
here
power.
We are.
Hold power.
Hold power. That's the thing. And it drives me crazy that you got these two white people from states that ain't got many Black people, let's just start there, are holding the power of our votes in their hands, which is silly. But what's most silly to me, and I want you to weigh in on this for us, is that fundamentally, Build Back Better. Let's say we're talking like about the immediate moment right now. The prospects of Build Back Better in Congress rest on the fact that there are Democrats in Congress. If midterms happen, and because of redistricting, drama like you talked about, because of voter suppression that's being enacted all around this country, and being upheld, in some instances by courts, like because of all of that, there may not be any Democrats in Congress. And so Build Back Better goes nowhere unless we actually have voting rights protected. And I'm just so confused as to, am I crazy making those connections? I'm confused about why the policymakers aren't making those connections. So please tell us, what are they saying to you? Like, what are you hearing as you are trying to move the ball forward, where they're like, oh yeah, we want to get one done, but they don't understand that it's connected to the other?
Right. And I think it's the political expediency that they're weighing. And I'm no political pontificator and strategist in that regard. But to me, to not see this moment as hyper important for long-term economic recovery and the protection of our democracy, regardless of the partisan seats that you sit in, like this is something that we must do. But unfortunately, again, corporations, a minority of voices that are controlling these seats, are telling us to ignore what the electorate has said, to ignore the will of the people. Build Back Better has been well polled. All these other kinds of interventions that have been offered are well polled. The public, there is huge public will for these things. But when you sit and see these two senators who don't well represent their electorate or the broader electorate are holding up progress, then we have to rethink how then this democracy is working. Is it really working? Is it really a representative democracy? And so again, until we get the right kinds of peoples in those seats who can then reshape and inform this inclusive economy or democracy that we all dream about, we in trouble. And so
we in trouble. And I don't even think that those are the people we need to be fooling with right now. I don't even think that we can trust Congress to do the right thing. We got three levers strategically here to play with. And it's obviously legislation, right? And trying to move some policy. Yeah. But then there is trying to change the law, which is going through the courts and dealing with the legal system. And then there's public perception. It's changing culture. So I think we got hearts and minds and the people on our side, understanding the power of the democracy in our vote. And I think that, you know, the lawmakers are doing whatever the heck they're doing that we can't rely on. You are also battling on the front of the courts and trying to figure out the law. Talk to us about the lawsuits that you filed in states like Indiana and Texas, and how you're hoping that that goes to also, you know, just sue people and try to get the courts to do the right thing.
Yeah, so this is where we've been really, successful in working with some of our local partners and also co-counsel and co-litigating with some of our other national partners like Latino PRLDEF, Pearl Deaf rather, an advancement project, to go into states like Florida, Indiana, Kansas, and either settle where we found egregious practices around voter disenfranchisement or barriers to the ballot. And we've been able to really win on a few of those things. I think what's also important for us is to think about this, like you mentioned, the third lever of, our democracy, which is the Supreme Court, and how there's more and more conversations about whether or not the court is needing to be expanded because it is not representative right now. It is not democratic. The Supreme Court is not a democratic tool to help not even uphold this Constitution, but just this democracy, as we've been seeing time and time again, cases that are undermining voting rights and some of these other civil rights that we see that we would like to have across the country. So I think long term, this might not be popular, but we at Demos believe that the court does need to be expanded. And we do need to have a judicial branch that is representative, that will protect this democracy and not skew from a partisan standpoint. And how do we get there? Well, we've got work to do.
Taifa, I am so glad that you came on to share and break down all of this with us. We're going to have you back. I got to roll right now, but thank you so much for joining me tonight on Amplified.